lab. Screenshot. Looks like your lab.
It is. It is my screenshot from my own device in my own lab. I was running a test on DFCI. And some odd behavior that I'm seeing with autopilot. That is another topic for another day. But welcome again to EDU Endpoint Office Hours. It is April 25th, and we are excited you are all here with us. Just a few updates. Release 2304 for Intune just came out this week. Some cool little nuggets in there, specifically Laps for Azure AD. Richard, did y'all? I think y'all talked about the new Windows Laps solution last episode. But what was missing was that Windows Laps for Azure AD joined devices was still in private preview, but with this release as of this week, it is now in public preview.
It's true.
So you can try it out. Which is, again, I did this just earlier this morning. The screenshot is from my own environment. I turned it on this morning, and it was so easy. It's amazing.
And we will have Jay Simmons, who's actually the developer on Laps for both the on-premises and the Azure Active Directory portions. He'll be here in 2 weeks to talk about not just Laps. I mean, it will be Laps, but the migration stuff that we had talked about last week, where we didn't really have a very clear migration plan. He's acknowledged in various public responses, either on Reddit or on Twitter or various other places, that there could be some better guidance and documentation there. So that's something that he's working on. And if you also notice, there were some issues with the Laps client when that was deployed out. And so he'll be coming to talk about some of that stuff as well. And so it'll be a great opportunity for you guys to get your questions answered, because there were some outstanding questions we had from the conversation last time that things literally had just been announced that exact day. So he'll be coming on and he'll be able to answer all those questions.
Awesome. That'll be a really good session. Excited for that. So join us again next week for that session. Again, try it out for those Azure AD join devices. You can now enable Laps for those devices. There's a few other things that came in the 2304 release. Richard, I don't know if you have anything noteworthy, but I was particularly excited about the Apple SSO integrations, and we can now do, for your Microsoft 365 accounts, you can do SSO on Apple devices. There's new policies available for that. Was there anything else that stood out to you?
Yeah, there's on Android where you can add I think it's a personal account now for I don't know if you can click into the link. I think you're just sharing the
oh yeah
the PowerPoint, but if you click into
that,
that,
it works. Yeah,
I don't know if it'll actually take you to the website.
No, I'm sharing my screen.
Yeah, share your screen and pull up the announcement, because the stuff around Google account support, that's actually been something that a lot of customers have asked about, especially some of my customers in the higher ed space out here on the West Coast. There you go.
You see this?
Yeah.
Is that better now?
Yeah, so being able to add Google accounts to Android Enterprise personally owned devices, you haven't been able to do this until now. And so being able to do that has been a blocker for quite a few folks that have been looking at leveraging Intune as their MDM for Android devices. So that's now there. And so if that was something that was blocking you, then that capability is there now. So you can try it out. Let us know if you have any feedback there.
That's great. Awesome. Let me get this deck back open. I think there were also some firewall rules and new settings available.
Yeah, that I think came out like yesterday. That was either yesterday or today.
Yeah.
So being able to manage the Windows firewall at a more granular level, that's just announced. I'm pretty sure it was today.
Yeah. I think there was a blog for it, but it was all lit up in the 2304 release. So
so that link right there will take you to the separate blog.
Yeah.
And if you thought that the Defender firewall was difficult to manage in Intune because we didn't have a whole lot of settings for it, it's a lot more granular now.
Yeah. By the way, this is PowerPoint Live, so these links should be live for you. So you should be able to click these right within the Teams window, and it brings it up in your own environment. So you don't have to look. You can consume everything that we're showing you. A few other things to announce: endpoint security reports inside of Intune now work for tenant attached devices. So for those of you that are in a tenant attached scenario or have devices that are tenant attached, you'll get those good reports available to you. There was an update for the skilling snack for Windows Update for Business, which is there's a lot of information in that skilling snack. I like this one. So if you want to get a little bit deeper dive into Windows Update for Business, that's a great resource there. And then there was the 2303 release for Configuration Manager Current Branch. That's available now for you to go upgrade your infrastructure. And this is cool. Richard, I don't know if you want to talk about this, but we now have public preview for Authenticator, what we're referring to it as Authenticator Lite inside of the Outlook mobile app on iOS and Android. Have you tried this out yet, or do you know much about this?
I haven't tried it because I've got Authenticator on my phone.
Okay.
But the idea behind this is that instead of requiring your end users to install the Authenticator app, you now can actually get your MFA requests to come through Outlook. And so if Outlook is a managed app, then if there's a number match request that has to happen through MFA, that request will actually show up in the Outlook app. So the end user doesn't have to manage multiple apps, they can just manage one app. And so this I think was announced a few days ago. And so it's not necessarily endpoint management related. We myself and Garrett don't really kind of do a lot of this stuff, but when I saw this come out, I was like, hey, this is actually kind of cool because there has been a lot of talk recently, at least in my patch, around passwordless authentication. And so this is just another way to make it a little bit easier for your end users to adopt that without having to install the full Authenticator app.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, you did mention number matching. That is just a PSA out there. There is a requirement from Microsoft for number matching being enforced. I think the deadline is next month. It was shifted. So if you haven't played around with that, make sure that you're aware of that change. It's all communicated through your Microsoft 365 admin center notifications and all of that. So pay attention to that too. Cool. Tech Accelerator, this event was going on when we met up last week or a couple of weeks ago, but the recordings are now available. So if you missed this event, a lot of the Intune PG got together and they were highlighting some of the new functionality in the Microsoft Intune suite and what's available for customers now. One I guess session in particular that I found interesting. I haven't finished watching it, to be completely honest, but Danny Guillory, one of the PMs, did a session on the advanced app management capabilities coming to Microsoft Intune Suite later this year. That was a pretty interesting, at least the first half that I caught was pretty interesting. So definitely encourage you to go watch the recordings. They should all be online and on YouTube. Awesome. I think we're ready to turn it over to Patty. Patty, are you with us?
Yes, Garrett, I'm here.
Welcome, Patty.
Yeah. Hey, Patty.
All right. Patty, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, let me share my screen. Okay. All right. Garrett, can you see the PowerPoint?
We got him.
All right.
You're good to go.
Very good, very good. So as you can see, today we are going to discuss around autopilot and co-management. I know this has been there for a long time, but the reason for our today's discussion is because whenever we think of bootstrapping the SCCM client alongside the autopilot process, we usually think of using the cloud management gateway, or we may also think of using hybrid domain join. That's exactly the reason why we want to have this call today. Is there's another implementation method in which is more simpler, and in this method you don't have to use the cloud management gateway or hybrid domain join. The reason we found this interesting is because of some of these specific use cases. In some scenarios, you are just starting to transition to Intune, and you may be doubtful if you can completely get rid of an SCCM client or not. In those scenarios, this specific implementation process can help you. Or you may have a specific SCCM task sequence in which you have a list of apps that you want to install it in a specific order. Again, here you can deploy the task sequence as one of the app alongside the autopilot process, and it gets installed one by one. The other use case we see is if you as an admin, if you have a lot of apps that are already pre-built in SCCM and you need little more time in rebuilding them in Intune. So in those scenarios, you can continue using SCCM on these devices. The other part is if you're used to the SCCM's rich reporting capability, this method will help you in continue using those reports. The point that I missed to mention here is that here instead of using the cloud management gateway or hybrid domain join, here all that we are using is a pure Azure AD joined device on which we are just installing the SCCM client and using that in a co-managed approach. So we saw the specific use cases. Some of the prerequisites are going to be Windows 11 or Windows 10 with the latest cumulative update. And you need to have the co-management already enabled in your configuration manager. We're not going to focus on in this session about configuring co-management. And this method is also useful when you're using user-driven autopilot profile. It cannot be used for other two autopilot scenarios. And since these devices come up as a work group joined computer, since they are not joined to the actual Active Directory domain, you also need to create specific boundary groups for them so that these devices can identify their site servers and then get their policies. And you can use IP address based grouping, or you can also use an IP range based grouping for these boundary groups. And lastly, the high level steps that we need to do to accomplish this is you need to have the co-management setting completed or configured within the Intune console. So if you go in here and if you go into devices and Windows enrollment, you come into the co-management, and that is where you configure the co-management setting. And you can see here you're setting this to override co-management policy and use Intune for all workloads. When you set this to yes, then all the workloads that you have migrated to Intune, those workloads will be taken over by Intune, and Intune client will start managing those workloads on those devices. And automatically install configuration manager client should be set to yes. And if you see here the command line, we haven't used any of the cloud management gateways addresses here. We are just using the pure on-prem SCCM client, the SCCM
Did we?
uh,
There it is. Still there, Patty?
Sorry, Richard, what was that?
You had dropped for a good, I don't know, 5-10 seconds.
Richard Garrett, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, we can
Okay.
hear you, Patty.
Yep.
All right. I thought someone had a question.
No, you had dropped out for about 5 to 10 seconds. You just kind of hung.
Oh, okay. All right. So the command line is something you can use that you're using currently in your environment. With this format, basically you'll have the SCCM site server address and the SCCM's management point address mentioned here, along with the DNS suffix. And you deploy.
Patty, you mentioned that we don't need the CMG, but we can use the CMG, right?
Exactly. Yep, that's a good point. So this implementation, we are focusing on a method where we are not using CMG, but if you already have a CMG or you have specific use cases that require you to use CMG, then you're welcome to use that process here.
Right. So because these devices are going to be Azure AD joined, the idea behind this is that those machines aren't just going to be on premises. They're going to move around, and they'll be could be at people's homes in a hybrid work scenario. And so the CMG is going to be important if you plan on still delivering applications and things from the SCCM environment.
That's true. That's true. So that also brings up a very important point that in this specific method that we are discussing, you need to have that line of sight with your SCCM site server whenever you want to deliver those SCCM workloads into these clients. Just for the same reason that Richard mentioned that we are not using CMG here. So unless the clients have that line of sight, to your SCCM site servers on-prem, will not be able to deliver those SCCM workloads into these PCs. Again, the use cases, the text or imaging or provisioning the devices within the on-prem environment within the campus, and they don't have a need for shipping the device to an end user's address or end user's home where they have to provision it themselves over the internet. So that's an important point. So that's for the first setting. And we also saw the command line in which you can use either a CMG based command line or a pure SCCM on-prem SCCM site server based command line. And then coming to the advanced settings, so just as we mentioned, these devices are coming in as a work group joint computers and not a domain joint. We need to approve them manually, and that's what we are going to see here. Okay. So if you come into administration, site configuration, sites, and if you click on hierarchy settings and you go into the client approval, that's where you set this setting whether to manually approve these clients or automatically approve these clients. And there's a recommendation whether to use or not to use. So you'll have to choose those options according to your needs. So basically, when the client gets when the after the autopilot process starts and when the SCCM client gets onto the device, you will basically see a record showing up on the SCCM console, and all that you need to do is select that specific record, and you'll have an option to approve that client manually. And if you make that approval at the tenant level or at the site level, this approval will be made automatically. And once that is set and your boundaries are set, all that you need to do is start the autopilot user-driven process on the device. it automatically sets up the SCCM client, followed by all the applications that are required on the device and the settings, and that should be it. So this is basically we want to cover today. This is just another way and another use case that you can take advantage of in case you have an requirement to still use SCCM on an Azure AD joint device, but you don't want to implement CMG or a hybrid domain join in your environment. You have this option available to use. That was it. Let us know if you have any questions.
Yeah, so it looks like we got some questions in the chat. So either questions or comments. Looks like Bryce has a comment here, or at least he's just posting a link on the approval. So, and I think sometimes there's like, I guess just kind of questions around why do we need to approve the machines? And a lot of it goes back to just kind of the history with Config Manager, and that, you know, it's obviously been a product that's been around for a while, primarily managing domain join machines. And so as long as the machine's on a trusted domain, then we automatically approve the machine. But with an Azure AD join device, if you look at the device as it is, it's really just a workgroup machine. So there's no trust with that device at the config manager level, because we just don't know, you know, there's no domain trust that we can take from that machine. So so the approval has to happen in order for that machine to work with the SCCM environment after the client's been installed via Azure AD join. So, but that's a great link to share there, Bryce.
Well, I guess I'll follow up, come off mute and just ask the question, because I was hoping to clarify. So the comment on that Microsoft documentation page, that the statement, this option includes, so the most secure approval method is to automatically approve clients that are members of trusted domains. This option includes cloud domain join clients from connected AAD tenants. So is the requirement to manually approve or approve all because we're coming in via autopilot, and at the point in time we're bootstrapping the config manager client, the AAD join is not yet complete? Like the assumption being the tenant that we're joining to, as far as an AAD join, is added into our config manager site. So it's per the documentation, that would, I imagine, be a trusted domain because it's a cloud domain that the config manager site knows about. Can you clarify a little bit for me? Help me wrap my head around it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Patty, when you were going through this, did your machines show up as approved?
No, I had to manually approve it, even though the AAD tenant is part of my SCCM infrastructure.
Okay, yeah, because that's what I've had to do in the past as well. So I wasn't aware that we actually added that paragraph to that, because it says that, Bryce, but what you're saying makes, based on what the docs are saying, it makes sense that, you know, we're
I'm trying to reconcile both statements being true. Like, right, the documentation says in some scenarios that you don't need to approve, but yet obviously with an autopilot bootstrap, you guys have seen that it is a requirement. So I'm guessing as to why.
Right. Yeah. So yeah. So it could be at some point it does show up as approved. I don't know. It's been quite a while since I've actually went through and set this up, but yeah, I guess we could probably look into this more and see if we can get a doc update, or at least some clarification on the docs to make it more clear that if you're doing this through autopilot, that you will most likely have to approve that machine. Whereas if you're doing hybrid Azure AD join, you don't, because it's obviously on the domain. So we'll need to kind of go and take a look at that.
Yeah, it'd be great to get some clarification or reproduction.
Yeah.
Yes, to Todd's point, that is correct, Todd. This is for Azure AD join only, and you need to have that line of sight with your CM infrastructure, which is on-prem. If the client is off-prem, this this setup without, if the client is off-prem and you still want this to work, then we'll have to include CMG into it.
Yeah,
Or presumably an internet management point that's actually exposed to the internet, I would guess.
Yep. Yeah,
that
is
I
a
mean,
more
you
better
effectively just have to hit the MP, right? So if your management point is sitting on-prem and you're off-prem and you have no way of getting to it, then there's no way to resolve in order for it to actually register with the MP. So if you have a CMG set up, then you would change the URLs for the CMG. And that way, if the client is off-prem and you're building that machine up, then it'll be able to communicate to the CMG to configure the device.
Hey, Richard, I had a comment about the whole thing that Bryce was talking about. Bryce, you were talking about that client approval process.
Yeah.
So back in the day when this is going back to my 2012 days when I worked in support, but Config Manager primarily uses Kerberos authentication for its communication for all the authentication. It operates totally in the system context, as far as the services are running. So when a domain join device is actually getting authenticated for the first time, it goes, if you want to ever go look in the logs, you can go on a client, look at client ID startup. You can actually see where we actually generate the certificate request. We contact the MP. The MP verifies that is that client registered yes or no with the config manager database. And then, if it's not, then it allows that client to be registered because there's an implicit trust between that machine, that the device that's on the domain and the domain controller. So it automatically grants that request. Whereas a device that is in an Azure AD tenant, as Richard was alluding to, is effectively a work group machine. So there's no implicit trust between that client machine and that domain that it's a part of. Even though the tenant might be attached, even though in the scenario where the config manager site server is tenant attached up to the site and we can discover AD and all that other stuff, there's no implicit trust there. So you have to, it's always been that you've had to, because the client doesn't use Kerberos, is not in the domain, then you've always tend to had to go back and approve those workgroup clients. And so the same thing here, you got to approve the Azure AD clients. And there,
No,
unless you downgrade
that all makes
security.
perfect sense. Yeah, and the scenario, the sites that I've managed, I'm so used to just having PKI when we got on-prem, so covering both domain join and work group. There's a qualifying sentence in the same documentation when you can't use PKI. So PKI provides that, or Kerberos as you described. But I would call out, it would be great to get the documentation that I linked to either clarified or updated, because what you're saying makes sense, but it also seems to contradict the new sentence that's on that page that actually says trusted domains include clients from connected AAD tenants. So either that's not true or it's only true in very specific scenarios. So it would be good to get clarification on that.
Yeah, I think in that particular case is that if you have that setting in the domain, I mean, I've always had to approve, even with the CMG in place, and I was using a third-party certificate to validate. You can still use third-party certificates back in the classic days. I haven't worked with CMG yet under Azure Resource Manager in a while. It's been a while since I've set it up. And a while meaning 2 or 3 years. Just it seems like it's been a while, but we can check into that and bring some clarity back to that.
Thanks, guys.
Yep. Thanks for the question, Bryce. What else we got here? There's Todd. It's harder to get a cert on non-domain join device, but you could use certs for ID2. Yeah. Yeah, if you ever had to deal with cert rec and doing all that stuff at the command line, that's always been fun. Yeah. Yeah, CMG in Azure is pretty easy to set up. It's all managed in the CM console. Yeah. Yeah, CMG is pretty easy to set up if you haven't done it yet. The only challenge is making sure that your certificates are updated once the certs expire or they're about to expire. Just remembering to do that. If you forget, then that's always a fun exercise, scrambling to update certs when people can't access the CMG.
And also sometimes in the past, I've also run into issues with that CRL, the certificate revocation link, which needs to be accessible from the external endpoints. So that's something we'll have to also keep in mind.
Yeah, if you're using an internal cert with an internal CA, then yeah, making sure that the CRL is updated and accessible. Pretty important. What else? So any other questions from folks? It doesn't have to be about the CMG and Azure stuff. If there's anything else that people have going on that we got a question, we got a lot of time left, so we can wrap up early, or we can just do a Q&A here if folks got questions.
Everyone's shy.
Everyone is shy.
You probably just need me to turn my camera back on.
All right, Garrett, fine. I'll turn my camera on. You turn your camera.
Okay, there you go.
And
There
all
you
the
go.
questions are just going to start coming.
Come on, Scott, get your camera on. Great.
Scott's probably out having lunch. He's like in a booth at like.
It's like almost 5 p.m. his time.
Okay, fine.
Almost dinner.
He's having an early day.
No other questions? Anything else top of mind? Anything you're seeing? Prepping for if we have K-12s, any prepping for state testing for high ed? Anything kind of into school related coming out?
Device deployments. Anything?
Big device deployments? Anyone got any?
That's what Garrett and I are working on anyway. Tens of thousands of devices.
Tens of thousands of devices. That's it. Throw it in the chat. What's the largest device deployment you've ever done? See if we can get some participation here.
I can't speak to huge scale deployments, but I know that at one point when the initial well, not the initial, but they expanded the Active Directory infrastructure, and they did like a bunch of simultaneous DC imaging. They had enough that apparently they did like 60 of them at once and then blew the power on the building.
Wow.
Apparently spinning that many hard drives up at the same exact moment is a big power spike.
Dang.
Good to know.
Now, usually, like the worst thing that I usually see is that like DHCP leases get run out. You just don't have enough, and it's like after a while, like imaging just dies because no one can get an IP.
You're out of leases.
20K. That's pretty. I think that's probably the 20, 30K. I think it's probably the largest I've done in one like week.
Yeah. I will give you an anecdote from an interesting unintended consequence this week. I guess we just had a mandate come down that basically certain apps called maybe a certain Chinese clock based app was not allowed to be used.
Yep.
And so we're relatively distributed administration, kind of centralized structure with centralized services with distributed administration. But I guess the centralized decided that this was high enough priority that they would put in their own GPO and kind of like enforce that. But because they don't do this on a daily basis, I guess they didn't really think through the consequences. So they pushed through an app locker policy that which is really weird because on most clients it was fine, but for brand new 22H2 clients, hosed them because I guess it didn't include the default app.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
That's what people forget all the time. It's the default app. So yeah, like you'll just block TikTok or you'll block some exe, not thinking, not reading the docs to know that you also have to include the other rules. And so now everything's broken.
but what was weird is why did it only seem to immediately affect 22H2 clients? Do they process that rule differently?
I don't know. I wouldn't expect them to, but I'm not sure. But I knew exactly where you were going with it because
Yeah.
I've done that myself in my lab. I haven't done it in a production environment, but messing around in the lab, it's like, oh crap, I can't do anything on this VM anymore. I'm basically just totally locked out of it now, and I got to just have to go back to a checkpoint. But yeah, I've definitely ran into that.
Yeah, it just shows you that you need to be working with endpoints to like actively and not just academically.
Yeah, no, you got to really I'm talking to, you can't test in production, right? But most people do. If you don't have like your own, virtual environment, whether it's Hyper-V, VMware, ESXi, VirtualBox, whatever, make sure you have one just so you can test these things out. Because even though the docs say one thing, it's this whole trust but verify. Go through the docs, but sometimes, things aren't clear, things aren't right. You just have to make sure that things work the way that you expect them to when you test them out. So.
Yeah, I have some sympathy because it obviously, I'm sure they were still on Windows 10 boxes, and this was definitely a Windows 11 22H2 consequence only. So they would have had to test on more clients. But this argues for rolling out in, what do you want, rings or waves,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Rather than all at once.
Yeah. If you're not doing ring-based deployments, this is a concept that I've kind of been doing for a while, even before the whole Windows Update ring thing. But send things out to IT, send things out to like a change acceptance testing group. I call them a CAT group. That way, just if they're like your business owners or they run your business apps, find a technical person in that group that's willing to take your changes first. Find a few devices, make sure things work there, and then finally go out to production, or expand the rings if you need to other groups. But always do that. Make your life a lot easier.
Don't push to 20,000 devices all at once.
No. I mean, in fact,
try not to.
No, but in fact, like we'll see. We'll like work with customers one-on-one, and we'll like just be talking to them about things that they should be doing. And they'll all of a sudden just open up their console and just start like say, okay, I'm doing what you're saying, and then they submit it and send it to all devices. And like say, whoa, that's not what we're saying. Like, hold on, I'm telling you what to do. Test it out to a group that of test devices or test users, but don't start deploying things to all devices or all users. These are career limiting moves that you could make if things don't go the way you expect them to. So
yeah, we always have that famous the famous case of the Australian bank that re-imaged all their systems, right?
Yep. Pushed it out to all devices, all systems collection. Yeah.
There's been a lot of those. Like I think the most famous one was when Emory University did this. I remember I was on Slashdot, and if you folks don't remember Slashdot,
what is that?
Slashdot might have been before your time, Garrett.
I truly don't know what that is.
So Slashdot was
still there.
I don't know if it is or not.
Yeah, it is.
Is it?
Yes,
okay.
it is.
This is like before Reddit, right? But this
okay.
if Reddit were around then this would have been all over Reddit. Before Twitter, all that kind of stuff. But someone just basically posted like Emory University is like undergoing like this major like IT outage, and when you go and actually look at what was going on, someone had pushed out a Windows image to every single device. They basically like re-imaged their all devices collection. And so like Windows 7 went to every single machine, all the servers. And so like at some point, everything stopped because the SCCM server got imaged with Windows 7. And what was really interesting about this whole thing was that there was like a PM within the university that was putting updates on like a blog post and just basically saying exactly what was happening. And they were like very, very clear, concise like updates to everyone of what was going on. And I was actually really impressed with how they were communicating to everyone everything, and they were doing it all in public. So the whole world got to see this if you were paying attention to it. And so it was pretty impressive on how they were able to recover from it. But this was probably the most public one that you could follow without like just reading it in the news. Like you could really just follow along exactly what's going on because this PM was posting updates. And so it's pretty crazy.
I really wish that would happen more often, honestly, because we get a lot of. Well, no, not the situation, but when
because I get those calls when those things happen. So I don't want that to happen.
But when they have the challenges and then they say, okay, this is what happened, this is what was responded, and this is because you get a lot of lessons learned. But now everybody's so we can't. It's like if you're a business, you can't do it because they're going to take a stock price hit and whatever. And then so now all the issues and you can't do a lesson learned because nobody releases like exactly what you were saying. They were very, this is what happened. This is what you got to deal with. So with our users, we have to deal with a lot of hypothetical. So this could happen, which are really helpful. It would be really helpful to be able to point out, well, look what happened over here. And this is why we need to do this, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, the postmortems are always good. Nowadays what the postmortems are, it's just Microsoft or Google or someone telling you, hey, we had an outage and here's what happened, but it's not really that actionable for customers. It's like, okay, well, there's nothing we can do about that. Like Microsoft, you got to fix your thing, or Google, you got to fix your thing, or Amazon, you got to fix your thing. And so not a whole lot that you can do to improve. So, but yeah. And Scott says new security regulations may not start enforcing that transparency. Yeah, it's true. All right, folks. Well, I think we're going to wrap up here unless anyone else has any questions they want to get answered now. Otherwise, the next meeting, like I said, next call, we'll have Jay Simmons to talk about laps, and he'll go over not only just the cloud laps, but also the on-prem stuff. And hopefully we'll you guys can bring your questions and talk about migration paths and stuff like that, and he'll be able to help answer those questions.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for joining, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.
Take care.
Thanks, Patty. Great job.
Yeah, thank you, Patty.
No problem.